I have no idea what he said. But that was one of the 5 Korean words I know. And I'll need many more to be able to do this presentation. So firstly, good morning and thank you very much for being here. Thank you for spending your precious time with us today to listen to the Red Hat story, listen to the open source story, and listen to the solutions that we truly believe are going to help you solve some of the problems you face today. So thank you very much. I am very excited to be here. Also, I'm very excited I'm after the coffee break. So hopefully all of you have some energy. And I'm excited because this morning we have heard many great examples, many great stories, many great customer evidence of how open source and Red Hat are helping solve many of the problems all of you face today. I'm not going to talk about the next big technology. I'm not going to talk about a beautiful customer case. I'm going to talk about something more fundamental. The question that I hope some of you have is, how do we get so much innovation of the open source model? How come all the new problems that are getting solved today are being solved by open source first? How did cloud, how did software-defined storage, how did software-defined networking, how did cloud operating systems, how did containers, how did DevOps, how did the solutions for these problems come out of open source first? There must be something that open source is doing right. So what I'm going to talk about is the fundamentals of open source. I'm going to talk about what does open source deliver. You saw the examples of what open source can deliver in what Brian presented this morning. Jay spoke about the Red Hat Open Innovation Model. So you're seeing the result, you're seeing the output, you're seeing what open source can give you. But some of you may be curious about how this gets created. Who is actually creating this software? What does the community mean? And then, who is this community? Who is open source? Who is Red Hat? But to start, let's start first with what is the mission of Red Hat? Why does Red Hat exist? And the role of Red Hat is very simply, first, to be the catalyst in the community of customers and partners. And the key word is catalyst. Red Hat is not the entire community. Red Hat is not the only one in the community. But we want to be, we aspire to be the catalyst. The catalyst is the one who will spark. The catalyst is the one who will help sustain. The catalyst is the one who will supervise and help and make sure that innovation is happening and the community is functioning. So we are not the entire community, but we aspire to be a catalyst in the community. And what does the community do? The community needs to have a purpose. And the purpose is to create better technology. Creating better technology is what we aspire to do together with customers, yourself, partners in this room, and the overall community, the contributors. And we believe in doing so the open source way. We will answer today the key question, what is the open source way? And the questions that I hope some of you have now is, so what is the open source way? How come open source is being so effective in solving the problems? Where did it start? Who owns it? Does somebody own it? How does it behave? How does it work? And how can you use open source in your everyday environment, as many of you are already doing so? The open source way is to create, share, and collaborate. Now, everyone creates, but sharing and collaborating are the most important part of the open source way. Because we believe no one has all the ideas. We believe your idea is more powerful when you share it with someone. And we believe that an idea gets better when somebody else can contribute to it. If you have an idea and you keep it, it's only your idea. It's a good idea. It may be a great idea, but it may not be the best. And that's the open source way. Share, collaborate, and make it easy for everyone to share and collaborate. Don't share and collaborate only when convenient to you. Share and collaborate for everyone's benefit. Make it easy so that everyone can. And ultimately, drive innovation so that ideas become more and more powerful. So to understand the open source way, let's go down to the lowest level, source code. Most people in this room already know what is source code. And the source code is made up of many, many, many small blocks, like this Lego brick. Is one Lego brick very useful? Many Lego bricks can come together to create beautiful models. You can create buildings, apartments, airports, airplanes, cities, countries. But they all have to be made up of each individual block. So one block is not powerful, but when combined with other blocks, it makes a beautiful sculpture. Now, most of you understand this very well. This is how the development process works. First, a developer will write in a development language. The example here is in C language. The developer writes the code in a language that's easy to understand for the developer. It is compiled through a compiler which converts it into machine language, ones and zeros and the bits and the bytes. And then the user uses the software to interact with the computer. This is a smallest possible unit of the code. But what we can do is, if we share the code, other people don't have to rewrite the same code. So if the developer shares the code with two other users, they don't have to solve the same problem. The problem has already been solved. The problem here is to print to the screen the words "Hello World." That's the problem. And the developer has solved the problem, and he's sharing his code with everyone, allowing them to reuse and not solve the problem all over again. So sharing code, point number one, sharing code makes it more effective, makes it more productive. You can do better things because somebody has solved many of the problems you already have, and you can reuse their solution. But number two, and equally important, or maybe even more important, sharing allows you to improve the code. So in this example, the developer wrote the code to print "Hello World." But other users have different requirements. instead of hello world, they want to print what's up. And they can innovate, they can change. And when innovation happens this way, it makes it much more rapid, much more faster. What happened after everyone starts to improve the code is also some people, some developers, then start to protect their code and then start to sell the binaries for their code. But if you only have the binaries of the code, can you improve the code? So you need to be able to collaborate on the source code for people to help you improve your code, to contribute to your code, and for you to become a better provider of software because other people can contribute to it. Open source is everywhere. Right from the morning when you get up, to your entire day, to your travel, open source is pervasive. It exists everywhere. The difference is whether you know it or you don't. Let's look at some popular places. Mobile phones. One can argue the whole mobile revolution is possible only because of open source. Android is open source based. iOS is open source based. Not just the base operating systems, but advanced features like Siri is running on Mesos, which is an Apache open source project. All the innovation in the mobile world has been possible because people come together to solve common problems and innovate. Not just innovation, but even places where you want high levels of reliability, where you require high levels of uptime, where innovation is not the key, but maintenance is the key, open source does really well. The picture you see here is New York Stock Exchange, which has been running Red Hat for many, many years. Not just New York Stock Exchange, but all stock exchanges in the world, 95% of them run Red Hat in some form and fashion, run open source in some form and fashion. And stock exchanges are very critical. They form the backbone of a country's economy. And if the country's economy can run open source, the backbone can run open source, so can you. And closer example for us, in Korea, the KRX runs open source. They run Red Hat. Let's take another example, cars. I think many of us know that most of the innovation now happening in cars is software driven. Your cars have more computing power in there than your PC. And it is not just the entertainment system in the car that is software driven. It is the mechanics. It is cars right from Tesla to Google's self-driving cars that are all being driven by open source. And if that open source was not available, that innovation would have taken many, many more years for that to happen. Daily boring things like weather forecasting also runs open source and depends on open source. So the weather authorities in the US, from tracking weather to sharing that information to running pattern analysis, depend on open source. Air travel, 100% of the airlines in the Fortune 500 run Red Hat and run open source. And you see two pictures up there. One picture is of the console, the entertainment console in the flight. I think everyone's seen those. The video, the picture you see there is the boot up, showing Red Hat being run for the entertainment systems. But it's not just entertainment systems. The US Federation, the aviation authorities also run open source to track flights, to avoid disasters, to see what is the flight pattern, and to guide the airlines and the aircrafts to their respective positions. Mission critical systems like these run open source. So right from in the morning you wake up, you listen to the radio, you listen to the weather forecast, you get into the car, you order a taxi, you catch a flight. Open source is everywhere. In some places you see it, in some places you don't. So that leads us to another interesting point, and it's not just software that is open source. The new wave of innovation is also happening in open source hardware. How many of us know what this is? There's a Raspberry Pi on one side and you've got the Uno on the other side. Both are open sourced, standards-based hardware, which means the technical specifications are available for anyone. It's not proprietary, it's not locked down. So if you wanted to innovate on top of Raspberry Pi, you have all the information available, all the code available, all the specification available. And that's the next generation of innovation. So where did open source start? It is important to understand the generation and the operation of open source for you to make a decision of having open source in your IT environments. Open source basically started because people had problems to solve. Now usually, and you see this from children, when they have a problem to solve, they first like to ask anyone else who may have an answer. When you have a problem in your daily life, you typically find out if somebody else already has the answer. These days, everyone first goes to Google if you need to find something. You don't try to find the answer yourself and refuse all help. So open source is, the basic philosophy is, if you have a problem, somebody else must also have it. Isn't it better if we collaborate? And there are few people who picked up on this idea. This is Richard Stallman. He was one of the most earliest founders and proponents of the open source movement. And this started when Richard Stallman was a student at MIT. The MIT lab looked something like this. It had, and some of you may remember, if you remember, then you are of my age because this is very, very old, the earliest computers. This one did not have a keyboard. It had dials and punch codes to feed in information to the computer. And computers in those days did very basic tasks. They were not very advanced. They did very simple things like storing data or printing data. And Richard had a problem in his MIT lab where he had a problem with the printer. And the printer was not working. Richard was very good at programming. He was very good at writing code. He knew where the problem was. But it was an IBM printer, and he couldn't fix it. So they sent it to the IBM workshop for repair, and IBM came back and told him they can't fix the problem. Now Richard said, hold on, I know where the problem is. If you give me the code, I can fix it because it's a problem in the code. And IBM obviously refused. And that led Richard to believe that this is not a great system where even if I know the answer, I cannot help you fix it. Many of you may face this problem today where you run a proprietary solution, it misbehaves. You may know why, but you can't read the code. You don't have access to the code. You cannot determine, you cannot fix the problem. You always have to depend on the original vendor of the software, because all you have is the binaries, and you cannot fix the binaries. So Richard had the same problem, and Richard said, this is not good. And he wanted to write his own operating system based off Unix in those days. But Unix was trademarked. In those days, Unix was a trademark, and you could not use Unix as a trademark. So he created GNU. GNU is basically GNU not Unix. That's what GNU stands for. He could not call it Unix, so he called it not Unix. And that was one of the earliest movements in open source. This was a project that started collaboration. This was the project that believed in sharing code with everyone. The second big wave, we'll come to that in 1 minute, but what Richard also did was he established the 4 principles of freedom in open source. The first freedom is the freedom to use, which means anyone can use the software. Even if you created, you cannot limit the usage. You cannot prevent anyone from use. It is open collaboration. Number 2, freedom to copy. You can make a copy of that software. Nobody is going to stop you. You can download it. Most of you know that many versions of Linux can be downloaded from the internet. You can download and you can run them. You're free to modify, which means if there is a certain feature or functionality which is not working or working differently than what you want, you have the right to change it. You have the right to fix it. And number 4 is the freedom to share. So once you have fixed it, you can share it with anyone you want. You can send it back to the same community it came from. You can share it in your company. You can share it with other companies. It's free to share. It's free to distribute. So those 4 principles are the founding principles of open source. And that is what makes open source development so special. What Richard also did was he implemented the GNU public license. Now, this license is not the same as your software license. This license is basically to ensure the 4 freedoms are protected, which means you will always be free to use, to copy, to modify, and to share. Anybody preventing sharing of open source is in violation of GPL, the GNU public license. Anybody making modification and sharing selectively is in violation, which is very important. It means you as a consumer get the latest and the greatest. People cannot keep innovation controlled. Innovation is available to everyone. The second big wave was when Mr. Linus Torvalds, I think many of you know him. He was the founding father of Linux. And the picture you see here is an actual email that Linus sent to a news group. And the mail says, I am doing a free operating system just for hobby. And this was the birth of Linux. So think about this. The software that runs most stock exchanges today, the software that runs most airlines today, the software that powers most enterprises today would not have happened if Linus was not able to share and collaborate and ask everyone to input. It started out as a hobby, but it grew into one of the most recognized operating systems over time. And many projects start like this. They may start with the hobby, software-defined storage, OpenStack, OpenShift, Ceph, Gluster. They all start out as small projects. But over time, they power some of the most important parts of IT in the enterprise. So how does the open source development actually work? There is a method, and we will understand the method now. The open source community has 3 important members. Number 1 member is contributors. The contributors are the ones who write the actual software. They write patches, they write features, they make enhancements, and they write the documentation associated with the changes they make. The second important member is committer. The committers are chosen from the community based upon their level of involvement. And they are elected by the community and they are replaced by the community. The committers are the one who review the submission by the contributor. They make sure it is good quality, it is secure, it has been tested, and then they put it in the main project. The third member of the community, also very important, is the users. The users are the one that actually download the software and test the software and use the software. They are the ones who submit new requirements. They are the ones who give feedback, which is very important for a community to function. So no community is complete without the 3 of them. Now, the community is not just random people calling each other. If the community has to create software like Linux, like OpenStack, and others, which can be from hundreds to thousands to million lines of code, they need to have some tools. They need to have some method for collaboration. So what you see here are the tools that are used for collaboration, the mailing lists, which is used for communications. You see the issue tracker, which is for working on the actual changes, and then the code repository, which is where the actual code resides. To go with the tools, they also have a workflow that is defined. The workflow is a closed loop. It is rigorously tested. The 3 members of the community play an active role. There's a proper release cycle. The point here is the community is not a bunch of random people making software when they like. It matches and even exceeds the level of sophistication that many proprietary vendors have. And it is important for you to know and realize as you make decisions and improvements to the way you use open source today. There is also a possibility of fork in a community. A fork in a community means if the community project, the main project, is going down a certain path, some people in the community may disagree. And a healthy community must allow for disagreements and a method to resolve. Because when you bring the most brilliant minds together, there is bound to be some disagreement. So the option in the community is you have the main community. If you and a subset of people do not believe in that technical direction, you can fork and create your own project from the main project. But forking obviously is the last resort, because you must then take ownership of the fork and maintain it. Hopefully you don't get to a fork. you can resolve it, and there are people in the community who help with the resolution process. The point here is the community does not just take one direction that you may not like. There is power to change the direction of the community or fork it as the worst case scenario. The community does not do copyright. It does copyleft. If anyone has actually read through the licensing agreement when you install a proprietary software, many of you install those many times on your laptops. The copyright today for any proprietary vendor talks about everything you cannot do. You cannot copy, you cannot modify, you cannot distribute, etc., etc. That's copyright. The community believes in copyleft, which is everything you can do. You can modify, you can copy, you can distribute, and that is the basis of the community. The licensing is crucial. Remember, we spoke about the GPL licensing. That's the licensing here. This is not software licensing. The GPL licensing is crucial because enterprises also want successful companies around open source. There are places where open source project is most useful, and then there are places where you want a vendor to provide you the right level of support, like Red Hat. And that's where the licensing comes into play that allows companies like Red Hat not to sell the software, but the services associated with the software. The bug fixes, the patching, the subscription services, the support services, and so on. So with that, please do visit the Red Hat booth. Please do visit the website for more information. In summary, open source is big. It's present everywhere. It is in cars, in mobile operating systems, in stock exchanges, in aviation. It goes from small projects to big projects. It has a robust collaboration mechanism that ensures the security, the reliability for what you choose to deploy in your IT. But most importantly, it allows for innovation. It allows for innovation because it believes in sharing. And not one idea is the best of all, but the best idea is when everyone comes together and shares their idea. Thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you very much for being here.